Shalom, good afternoon from Jerusalem, Israel. This is Mr. Lowell Joseph Gallen, founder of the Root and Branch Association Limited, established in the United States of God of Israel, bless America, in New York State in 1981, now celebrating our 42nd year. Today is Tuesday, September 26, 2023, in the Gregorian calendar, and it is the 11th day of the 7th Israelite Hebrew month in the new Hebrew Israelite year 5784. Welcome to episode 14 of our monthly seminar entitled Abortion, in quotation marks, Moloch Mass Murder Child Human Sacrifice Global Industry Seminar. It's a research fellowship. The Madam Chair of the fellowship and the monthly seminar is Mrs. Cecily Routman of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in the United States of God of Israel, bless America, the founder of the Jewish Pro-Life Association. Now, before we begin our program, let me do my rainmaking bit for Cecily and her colleagues and myself. Please support my work to build our Hebrew Bible-based broadcasting network from Jerusalem, Israel, to honor the God-land Torah and people of Israel and all humanity. You click on the links below. I use PayPal. I don't like them. They censor. I'm opening other payment platforms, so there'll be more opportunities to do that. And please support Cecily's Pro-Life Foundation. You'll see the link below. There's many ways you can do that financially as a volunteer. There's many ways you can support her sacred work to save the babies from the demonically possessed, narcissistic, psychopathic, sadistic, satanic, the creatures, from murdering any more babies. It's a terrible situation. We'll just have to soldier on until the unconditional defeat and destruction of the enemy here in the land of Israel and worldwide. So now, without further ado, let me hand over the mic to Madam Chair, Mrs. Routman. Cecily, it's all yours.
Thank you, Lowell, very much for your very energized and bold introduction to our program today. I must say that recently I've been quiet. I'm feeling quiet inside. So the Yom Kippur and my heavy heart about so many people in the world, Jews included, somehow or another, rationalizing this mass slaughter of our most innocent. And I'm starting the new year here, wanting to share a woman's message with you. Andrea Widburg, a Jewish woman who is the new deputy editor at American Thinker. And her video is so great. And while you have been encouraging me to sort of broaden our scope a bit here, and so I thought this was a good way to start the year, and she can lay the groundwork for us. It does last about an hour. It's very good. And then I hope we can stay a while and share our thoughts about the program. So without wasting any more time here, I'm going to share this video with you. And thank you all for being here. It's a delight to see you.
Hello, everybody. This is Bookworm, and I thought that today I would tackle a big topic instead of multiple smaller ones. And my big topic is that 21st century Neo-Paganism is worse than the original. So it's not news to any of you that we have reverted to paganism in many ways. So some of what I'm saying is going to be kind of familiar to you, but what I hope to do is lead up to a stirring conclusion about the fact that we have taken paganism and made it even worse. So this is organized roughly into three areas. First, I discuss paganism in the ancient times. Then I discuss how the Judeo-Christian doctrine came along and was antithetical to paganism. And then I talk about our return to paganism, only the fact that we are worse than the original pagans. And that's not just because we should know better, having gone through the Judeo-Christian phase, but our approach is actually worse, if you can believe that. So let me start. Characteristics of pagan worship. Worship revolved around tangible phenomena and objects. I'm going to whip through this fairly quickly. You had your weather gods, you had your food gods, you had your water gods, you had your fabulous creatures. All of it was very animist. All of it was very concrete. All of it was tactile and related to the visual world and the phenomena people experience. So that's not anything new for you guys. What's also not new for you is that if you look at pagan mythology, especially again of the ancient world, the pre-Judeo-Christian world, it is that the gods displayed very negative human traits. They were both human and negative human. They were very interested in themselves. Humans were their playthings rather than their responsibilities. And what you had was lust. If you're looking at the video that goes with this, I've got a painting of Leda and the swan, with the swan being Zeus, who transformed himself so he could seduce her. We have revenge, and the example I chose was Artemis and Apollo slaying Niobe's many children because Niobe had offended Artemis and Apollo's mother, so they took their revenge on her children. Boredom, I couldn't think of any specific examples, but what I was actually thinking of was the old movie Fantasia, where you see Jupiter, the cartoon Jupiter, hurling bolts just because he's bored, and he's targeting all the little nymphs and nymphets and unicorns or whatever the things they are, fawns. Jealousy, the gods were frequently motivated by complete jealousy. Pagan morality. Many years ago, I guess in the 90s, it was either Showtime or HBO had a great show set in ancient Rome at the time, the end of Caesar's reign and the beginning of Caesar Augustus. And after they did the series, they had an interview with an expert in the Roman era, and he said something that's really stuck with me, and all I can do is paraphrase because I haven't found the specific quotation again. But he said that pagans did not have a set overarching moral system underpinning their religions and lives. They had rules. So they had rules of conduct to make society work, and they had constant moving targets of keeping in good odor with the god. So one's acts were always done with an idea, the idea of keeping in line with the god. And that brings me to my next point, which is that the gods constantly needed to be placated. So how did you placate the gods? Well, you had sacred sex, so you had temple sex, ritual sex, and that could be homosexual, heterosexual, or with children. So sexuality was an offering to the god. And I came across, while I was looking this up, this is sort of an aside, an Aztec goddess named Tlazolteotl, Tlazolteotl. I don't know how to pronounce that, but according to Wikipedia, this was the deity of sexuality, vice, purification, steam bath, lust, filth, and a patroness of adulterers who both inspires and forgives lust and other sexual vices. And I mention it because sexuality was so closely tied up with paganism, with the pagan faiths. When we think of it, we think of orgies. Next is food sacrifices. Now, we know that Judaism had them up through the Second Temple, but they were certainly a constant in all pagan religions, which is that you bring offerings of food, either animals or grain, to the gods. In fact, the story of Cain and Abel was the competition over whether meat or grain was the better offering to God. And then you have human sacrifice, which is, again, the Vikings, the Druids, the Aztecs, the very, very ancient Greek god. They were all human sacrifice was the ultimate sacrifice. When I think of human sacrifice, I do tend to think of the Aztecs. And what I always remember is that in one glorious celebration of a new temple, the Aztecs sacrificed 80,000 people. Now, this had a lot of utility for them. For one thing, it got rid of their military enemies in a society where you can't have Gitmo or concentration camps. When you've defeated another tribe or multiple tribes, you have to either enslave your opponents or you kill them. And what better way than to kill them as an offer to the gods? I've also heard that there was cannibalism that went along with this because the Aztecs had grown so quickly, they'd used up all the protein in the surrounding area. I don't know if that's true. It was also, the pagan world is a world where the human form didn't have physical boundaries as seen through the gods. And the examples I came up with is one that you're seeing a lot of today, which is the Satanist Baphomet, which is a goat-headed, winged human figure. And it really is about the fluid boundaries of the human body. And this, I believe, is from some sort of, the picture I have on the screen is from a temple somewhere in America, and it shows a little boy and a little girl looking lovingly up at the goat-headed Baphomet, who has the inverted pentagram behind him. Another thing is Anubis, the jackal-headed weigher of hearts, which was given in Egyptian mythology. They also had the falcon-headed god, so they had a lot of things where human and animal figures were joined. And drugs were very much a part of worship. And when I think of that, I think mostly of the southwestern Indians who used peyote in their ceremonies. And these were not just going out and getting stoned. This was where religion and drugs were used to reach a higher consciousness. It was a very formalized experience. So, what was the goal of these pagan practices? Was it cruelty? I mean, some of it seems cruel. Pedophilia, ritualized prostitution, very cruel animal sacrifices, human sacrifices. I mean, the pagan world was an insanely cruel world. One of the books I frequently cite to is Steven Pinker's The Better Angels of Our Nature, and he has chapter and chapter and chapter about the cruelty of the pagan world. But it really wasn't about cruelty. What's so interesting about it is that it was about societal order and life. So a lot of the rules were simply about how to get along in your own communities, and the rules about wives and marriage and children, and just like any society has rules. But it was also about life, and that sounds really weird when we talk about human sacrifice and stuff like that. But everything they did was an effort to get the gods to be more benign towards humans. And everything was about easing human life and promoting human existence on the earth. And I didn't mean to flip my slide. If you're watching the video, that was a mistake. So let me go back to the other thing. What I was going to say is we gave the gods animals so they would give us more animals for labor and food. We gave them crops so they would give us more crops. We gave them some sacrificial humans so that they would optimize conditions for the rest of the humans. Throw a virgin into the volcano, get good harvests, get happy gods, don't get hurricanes and monsoons, and more people live longer. We gave them sexual excess because we associated sexuality with procreation. So if we give them sexual excess and pedophilia with children who are the signs of life, then the gods will reward our societies with greater life. So ultimately, although the practices seem to us to be very cruel and in many cases deadly, they were for the greater good of humanity. And that's a thought I want you to hang on to as I go further into this talk. Next point, which people who have been watching the video have already seen, which is the ethical monotheism of the new Jewish God. So suddenly, instead of having a multiplicity of pagan gods, each of whom serves a different purpose, each of whom is tied to a different specific reality in the world, to illness, to crops, to water, to forest, to weather, to everything, suddenly you have a single abstract God who we know has a human form, but otherwise is way up and far away from us, and we don't make representations of him in the Jewish tradition. It is a purely abstract, unitary God, and it is a universal God. So you don't have your tribe's God, you don't have your household God, you don't have your nation's God. There is one and only one God. And what is this God about? This God is about a few things. First of all, this God is about the binary nature of the world. And this is a very important thing about the God. And it is important to remember because the binary did not exist in the pagan world, where everything was fluid, where there was multiplicity of gods, where the human form didn't have a fixed shape, where sexuality was whatever. Suddenly we have a world where we have heaven and earth. That's how the Bible opens. You have human and animal, because the creation starts with the animals, and then the human, who is separate from and has dominion over the animals. That does not mean destroying them. It just means the human is in charge. Male and female, and the female is the equal of the male. They both reflect God's human shape, and the female comes from the man's ribs, so she is his partner. That's my preferred Genesis creation story. You have clean and unclean, which most people associate with kosher food, where foods such as pigs and crustaceans, which would include the crickets that the World Economic Forum wants us to eat, that pigs and crustaceans are unclean, that there are other foods that are clean, that there are combinations of foods that are unclean, so you don't mix the meat of the kid with the milk of the mother. You don't mix meat and milk in kosher food, so clean and unclean in food. Very significantly, you have procreative and non-procreative relationships. One of the main things about the Bible, it's hostility towards ritual prostitution, and really any prostitution. It's hostility towards masturbation or onanism, and it's a special hostility to homosexuality, is because those are all non-procreative uses of sex. The Bible approves of heterosexual male-female sex for the purpose of having children, and from that, the Bible strongly approves of the core nuclear family, although of course you have the whole tribal thing of extended families, but mom, dad, children. That is the basis of a society and of a life. Speaking of life, one of the things about the Jewish Bible, about ethical monotheism, is the incredible focus on life. It starts with the Noahide laws, which were the laws that God announced after the Great Flood, and these were the laws that were supposed to control the new world. And I've got my summary from the Chabad, so some of which I'm quoting, some of which I summarize, and I can't remember which now, but if you go to Chabad, you can figure it out. First, you acknowledge that God is a unitary being or non-being, a divinity who cares about human well-being, which is, again, the antithesis of everything pagan, where you had a multiplicity of gods who really care about themselves, with humans kind of caught in the maelstrom of the gods' lives. You don't curse God. You don't murder. A society would have rules against murder because it's destabilizing. But the Judeo-Christian God said murder is wrong because human life, which God created, is uniquely valuable. And this is such an important rule that, of course, we return to it in the Ten Commandments. Another interesting rule that a lot of people don't know about is do not eat the limb of a still living animal. Remember, I mentioned that animal sacrifice was very cruel because they would slowly take out the entrails so that they could read the signs in the entrails, the signs from the gods and the planets. But another thing that the ancient world used to do was that they would eat animals in bits and pieces. So they might cut off an animal's leg to eat, but since there was no way to preserve food, they would keep the animal alive and then cut off some more of it and some more of it. So the Noahide laws said, no, you don't get to cause an animal indescribable pain by eating it over a period of days or weeks while it's still alive. Do not steal, which is really important because humans care most for things they own. So a society without ownership is a very decayed, uncared for, unkempt society. Also, the rule against stealing was the basis in many ways for the rule against slavery, because when we have a slave, we steal their liberty. Harness and channel the human libido. That's language I am quoting from Chabad. And that meant rules against incest, adultery, rape, homosexuality. All of these damage the family. All of these damage the community. And all of these are the antithesis of human procreation, of life, of a future for a society. And as you may recall, I did say that paganism was also about life. You placate the gods to get life, whereas ethical monotheism says you live lives of sexual rectitude, avoiding sexual behaviors that do not create life. You dedicate your sexuality to the creation of life. And then, of course, the last one is to ensure justice, which is just a reminder, is not the same as fairness or even kindness. The next step, the obvious next step from the Noahide laws was the prohibition against human sacrifice, and that comes from the binding of Isaac when Isaac was taken to the mountaintop to be sacrificed and God stayed his father's hand. And I'm pretty sure his father is Abraham. Sometimes I get my patriarchs confused. And why was the story told this way? It wasn't just to be cruel to Isaac, although he must have suffered terribly believing he was to be killed. It wasn't cruelty to Abraham, who was going to have to kill the son he and Sarah had waited so long to have. This is how you make a point. This is an incredibly dramatic narrative which drives home definitively the fact that the ethical monotheistic God of the Jewish Bible does not want human blood, that humans have value. It's a point we keep coming back to in the Bible, the value of humans. And then there are the 10 Commandments. I won't go over all of them. I think you're familiar with them. The ones that kind of tie back into what I'm speaking of, well, it's against the multiplicity of gods. I am the Lord your God. There are no other gods before me. That's unpagan. Honor thy father and thy mother. That is nuclear family. Don't commit murder. That is respect for life. Don't commit adultery. That is respect for, again, the nuclear family and the procreative relationship. Don't steal. Respect for property and life. Don't bear false witness. Don't covet. Those are rules for getting along with each other. So the 10 Commandments are these huge overarching rules that define man's relationship to God, man's and women's relationship to family, and man's and women's relationship to society. And they are not dependent on random gods and random rules and placating everybody and constantly everything changing around. They're very fixed, big rules. And as Dennis Prager said, any society that is built around the 10 Commandments is going to be a very safe, stable, prosperous society. Can't argue with that. So all of these rules originally were for this small Jewish tribe concentrated in the lands of Judea and Israel and what is now modern Israel. What universalized them, and God had said they were to be universal laws under Noah, was Christianity. And I'm Jewish, but as far as I'm concerned, Christianity is super duper important for human survival and human optimization, because it brought these moral laws, these really important, totally unpagan moral laws, into the larger culture. And the combination of Judaism and Christianity did so many wonderful things for the world. It led the way to the end of slavery, a condition existing since time immemorial everywhere on the planet. But the concept of human life being valuable, of all of us being in God's image, and of not stealing, including not stealing liberty, inevitably meant the end of slavery. It also ended child labor for many of the same reasons, and it elevated the status of women. Again, this is because women were created, as were men, in the image of God. And also Christianity, Catholicism had the cult of Mary, which elevated one woman so high that all women, if they were led a life of rectitude and goodness, inevitably had the Mary patina. So the Christianity, it focused on the worth of the individual. And I do understand that both Christianity and Judaism, that the practitioners of those faiths often fell far short of these principles. They murdered, they did not respect life, they enslaved people, they treated women badly. But the fact that humans aren't always well behaved doesn't mean that principles aren't good. And that's a distinction leftists like to ignore. Humans are not perfectible, but if you don't have good principles, humans can't even aspire to perfection. Not that they can achieve it, but the more you aspire, the closer you are to reach your aspirations. If you have no aspirations, you're just wallowing in the mud. So let's get to the new paganism. So I think I've covered my conception of what core paganism is and the giant chasm between paganism and the Judeo-Christian tradition. And what's important to note here is that our country was built on the Judeo-Christian tradition. Contrary to leftists, it wasn't built on Native American rituals and beliefs, which were, again, pagan. It wasn't built on Islam, which is reworked paganism filtered through the Bible and Muhammad's ideas. Judeo-Christian doctrine took a stand against everything pagan, and we have, as many people have said, returned to the new paganism. And if you're looking at the video, what you see is a picture of an actress, Octavia something or other, who showed up in a recent Apple video in which Apple boasts about how it is doing everything it can to benefit the climate, climate change, which is the ultimate new paganism. And of course, Mother Nature is a sassy black woman, because what could be more politically correct? But as someone commented, Matt Walsh maybe, because I like listening to him, it is obvious that the people who wrote the video, the people behind the video, the actors and actresses, and the Apple people themselves view Mother Nature as a tangible and real thing, a real person, a real whatever, before whom they must fall and worship. So, what we're experiencing today is both similar to and worse than yesterday's paganism. As you may recall, I said that one of the things that paganism had in common with the Judeo-Christian system was that it is about life. The Judeo-Christian tradition is a God who demands that humans behave in ways that facilitate life. And the pagans had the exact same idea, but because they were not dealing with an ethical God, but were instead dealing with a multiplicity of arbitrary and capricious gods, everything they did was directed at trying to get those gods to provide optimal circumstances for them to survive. We'll give you one human sacrifice if you'll save the rest of our community. We'll torture animals to death horribly if you'll give the rest of our community food. We'll tithe to you a share of our grain if you'll make our crops go. And over, everything they did to all these random gods was to optimize life on the planet. And the same thing is true of the Judeo-Christian Bible, except without the random and arbitrary and capricious. So we have the same practices, but hostile to life. We have earth worship. So we have Gaia worship is the basis of climate change panic. We are despoiling the earth. Mother Nature, as the Apple video showed, is angry at us and suffering, and we must do all sorts of things to placate her and benefit her dominion of earth. Gaia worship, of course, is fundamentally pagan. It's also fundamentally anti-biblical because, as I said, this is to placate her dominion over earth, whereas the Bible, God gave man dominion over earth. And in fact, I'll quote it. It's Genesis 1:26, and this is a modern translation. Let us make man, God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky and over the cattle and over all of the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. Gaia worship is the opposite of that, where we must be subordinate. And what do? And a lot of this is based on California, which is the state I know best, and the one that is most advanced in terms of implementing Gaia worship. No new reservoirs. The state has doubled in size since the last reservoir was built. Reservoirs are water, water is life. Putting animals over humans. We saw that back, was it in the 80s with the spotted owl up in the Pacific Northwest, where they were getting rid of jobs, all the jobs that had to do with cutting down the trees in which the owls lived. By the 90s, they'd started doing something very different in California, which was putting a delta smelt, a very small fish in the California Delta, ahead of crops, because the Central Valley of California was one of the most fecund places in America if you put water through it, and the water came from the Delta. It was water that was diverted from the Delta. And when I was growing up, the Central Valley was called the breadbasket or the fruit basket of America because it produced so much food. Now, when you drive down I-5, the main north-south artery in California, what you see are dust fields and signs that people have put up saying Congress created Dust Bowl, because what happened was under the Environmental Protection Act, we elevated species over humans. So when someone said, irrigating the Central Valley is killing the tiny delta smelt, they stopped irrigating the Central Valley. Large parts of it still do get irrigated, but large parts of it are dead, completely dead, because we chose not man's dominion over the delta smelt, but the delta smelt's dominion over man. Disappearing power stations. One of the big things now under Gaia worship is to have green energy, renewable energy sources. And so we have to get rid of all those dirty, yucky power stations that are being decommissioned all over the place. But those dirty, yucky power stations that go at work on coal and other fossil fuels are what underpin our entire modern life. Without them, modern life is kaput, and I'll get to more of that later. The one thing, and the other thing is, snap, I'm trying to remember, renewables, I believe that they currently cannot provide more than 10% or so of our energy needs. It's a very small percentage. You get rid of all this fossil fuel, we have no energy. All those electric cars are not going anywhere. And the irony is there is one renewable source of power, one clean renewable source of power that the left refuses to contemplate, and of course that is nuclear power. So once again, we're seeing that getting rid of power stations means getting rid of life, and they don't want to substitute anything that will continue to support life. So Gaia worship is antithetical to life. Biofuels. Biofuels are supposed to be cleaner than fossil fuels. Not only are they not cleaner, if I understand correctly, but there's a much bigger problem, which is that they rely on food crops. Well, you can either use these food crops to feed people or to power cars. And leftists have chosen them to power cars, although they ultimately want to get rid of cars. And in third world nations where biofuels are more profitable than food crops, people starve to death. So once again, this Gaia worship is anti-human. Well, hello, Mr. Max. My dog just came to visit. Recently, the Biden administration has been looking into actually blocking the sun to prevent climate change, to protect Gaia from the boiling earth of fossil fuel. Blocking the sun. Without the sun, there is no life. And Exhibit A is the dying off of the dinosaurs when a meteor hit what is now the Gulf of Mexico and effectively blocked out the sun, killing the dinosaurs. Exhibit B is the year without sunshine when the volcano, darn it, I'm forgetting the name now, but a volcano in the early 19th century erupted. It was a filthy volcano. It blocked the sunshine, and there was mass famine around the world. They didn't know that it was from the volcano, but it was from the volcano. So Gaia worship is antithetical to human life. So I mentioned that without fossil fuels, we're in deep, deep trouble. I've got a quote on the screen from Hobbes. Life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short without fossil fuels. And we know that because all we have to do is look to a pre-fossil fuel era. We'll freeze to death or die from heat. Most likely freeze to death. Heat makes you miserable. It doesn't necessarily kill. We'll starve because fossil fuel is part of every aspect of modern food production. It's part of clearing the fields, plowing the fields, planting the crops, fertilizing the crops, harvesting the crops, and getting the crops to market. And once they get home, it's part of cooking the crops and freezing the crops, refrigerating the crops. There is no food, well, much less food without fossil fuel. We won't have clean water because every one of our our plants for cleaning water requires fossil fuel. Without clean water, you have mass disease or mass drunkenness because everybody needs to revert to alcohol. We won't have medical care or medicine. Our pills are made in modern factories that require fossil fuel, and more than that, and this is not good, they're mostly made in China and India. So they have to come across oceans for us to even get them. Can't do it. Maybe you can do it with sailing ships, not a good system. And if you think about your recent trip to a hospital, every aspect of a modern hospital is dependent on fossil fuel. From the lights in the offices that don't have windows, to the equipment, to the testing procedures, everything requires fossil fuel. We won't have any basic transportation. See, you can't get anywhere. You're back to a pre-modern age of either walking or horseback riding, if you are one of the lucky few to have a horse or maybe a donkey. The other thing about nasty, brutish, and short without fossil fuel, of course, is a return to slavery. It's a point I can't make often enough, but yes, the Judeo-Christian doctrine, the respect for human life, the respect for not stealing liberty, all of these things helped lead us toward recognizing that slavery was evil. But slavery would never have ended without fossil fuel that mechanized labor that previously could only be done by humans. And if you wanted to become a rich and successful human, you could only do it by using other humans to do the brute force labor that we now have fossil fuel doing. So life will be horrific without fossil fuel. So earth worship, similar to yesterday's paganism, much worse because it's anti-human. Child sacrifice. The pagans did not sacrifice all the children in their community. They sacrificed a few select children, special children, as gifts to the god to say, look, we're giving you this one incredibly special child. Now please save all of us and our other children. It was very pro-life. Currently, it is not pro-life. As you all know, since 1973, 61 million babies have been aborted in America. That's 10 Holocausts. And something for you to think about, I mentioned that one of the Noahide laws was about saying you cannot torture animals to death, to a slow death by eating them alive. And the kosher laws, even though they seem cruel to us today because you slit an animal's throat rather than having a pole instantly rammed through its brain, by the standards of the day, it was very pro-animal because you didn't torture it to death to see what its entrails had to say. But when we have abortion, those babies are literally eviscerated inside a woman's body. And what we're told is, well, they're not sufficiently developed to feel it, but that's a guess. And the reason I say that's a guess, and I know I'm not a scientist, but I also pay attention to the enormous number of stories that keep coming along talking about how we're discovering that people whom we thought were brain dead are not. So we, just as we don't really understand where an octopus's brain resides, we truly don't understand the full scope of a human brain and the human spirit's relationship to that brain. So child sacrifice on an incomprehensible scale. Keep in mind, and something else, I was listening to Andrew Clavin, and he said a very interesting point, which was that abortion allows us to have sex without meaning or connection. Because sex is, you have sex, you have a baby, you abort it. It's just, there's no relationship required to nurture a baby because you don't need to keep a baby that's created. And he said that this makes us like animals. And my first thought was, oh, well, he could also say that makes us like pagans who did human sacrifice. And then I thought, no, that's wrong, because both animals don't have sex for no reason. They don't have relationships, but they absolutely have sex for procreation. Heck, when you look at how dogs and cats suffer, or praying mantises, or the male black widows, the only reason to have sex is for procreation. And pagans also had sex for procreation, whether it was actual procreative sex or it was all the weird sexual rituals that were intended to encourage the gods to think in terms of fecundity and fertility for humans. So in that way, abortion makes us less than animal, and it makes us worse than pagans. Another point about our culture of abortion is that it completely deletes value from life. Human sacrifice in the pagan era was about the value of life. As I said, I'll trade you a baby, I'll trade you, God, a baby, and you give me lots of healthy babies in my community. But I have on the screen just a random headline from Breitbart. At least 14 shot Friday into Saturday night in Mayor Brandon Johnson's Chicago. I don't know when this headline is from. I forget when I saved it. It could be from any time, because we all know that in America's inner cities, the young black men primarily are slaughtering other young black men. And there are a lot of things going on, and it's not about gun control, it's about cultural values. And one of the things is that Planned Parenthood has always targeted these communities. And in many of these communities, there are years when there are more babies aborted than there are born. And how can young black men value life when they know that the mothers in that community don't value life? They just routinely slaughter life. So if mom is going to slaughter the life within her, why shouldn't I, the young black man, to prove my manliness or get rid of an enemy or just for the heck of it, go and fire 42 shots into an apartment building, killing whomever? Once you say there's no value to life, which the pagans in their own way did and the Judeo-Christians did, you're worse than pagans. The whole, well, this is a weird slide. Anyway, what we've done is we're also breaking the maternal bond, which is one step beyond abortion. It's preventing pregnancy altogether. Abortion has, and China had the one-child policy, which it had to give up because it's now in a population slide from which it can't recover. It's killed off so many potential babies. I think like 120 million, worse than what we've done, that the demographic slide is probably irreversible. And so it's walking it back. But when it had its one-child policy, what it said, it was incredibly brutal. It forced abortions on women. It forcibly sterilized them. It imprisoned them for getting pregnant. It was a terrible, terrible policy. We are doing something different. That was a one-child policy. We are doing a no-child policy and doing it through a very soft sell. So instead of forcibly aborting children or sterilizing women, we are telling them your life will be so much better if you don't have children. And I have on the screen a picture of a young woman. I found it on a website that I'll talk about later, a Facebook page, lounging on a chair in the sunlight, and said, the caption is, "Still waiting to regret not having kids." And then there's another one saying, of Descartes saying, "I think, therefore I am, not having kids." And we have corporations that are promising to give women abortions and pay for their travel costs and their abortion expenses. And the military has been trying to get by the Hyde Amendment since the Dobbs decision by saying, if you're in say Alabama or Mississippi or wherever, they've said you can't have an abortion at a military base. Well, we can't pay for your abortion, but we'll pay for you to go to California and have 3 weeks off. So our culture is massively incentivizing not having kids. So it is a soft approach to China's one-child policy, and it is a zero-child policy, which is pretty fascinating. Famous people are encouraging it. Mia Khalifa, I think it was Mia Khalifa, encouraged getting divorced, don't stay in relationships. Emily Ratajkowski said, get divorced, don't stay in relationships. A young woman shot to fame because Matt Walsh rather impolitely said that she seemed to have an empty and horribly stupid life when she was saying, well, when I worry about the choices I made, well, I don't have children, so it means I get to sleep in, and I went to a concert last night and I got drunk, and now I can sleep in and I can make a new eggplant recipe. And what an empty life. And this is something that really resonates with me, because in my 20s, I didn't actually want to have children because I was living that pleasantly empty life. I slept in, I went out with friends, I did what I wanted. What led me to have children within my marriage was that I realized I was going to become an awful human being, a selfish, immature, rigid, horrible human being. So I didn't have children to bring life into the world. I had children to save myself from being awful, and it was the right decision. I would have been awful. I was well on the way to being awful. Having children made me a better person. It forced me to grow up. It forced me to be nicer, which you wouldn't believe when you listen to my vituperation about public figures. But in my private life, I'm a very nice person. And at the end of the day, despite really struggling with having children, pregnancy was tough on me, having children was tough on me in many ways. My children, my adult children, are my pride and joy. They are my greatest accomplishment. There is no legal brief I've ever written that will give me the pleasure of my children. And they talk to me all the time. We travel together. They are something incredible that I created. And all these young women who are being taught not to have children are losing out on this. But it's not just pop culture that's saying it. We're also getting this message from famous people. If you're looking at the video, I apologize for the picture of Chelsea Clinton. I mean, not a very nice person. And despite her many degrees, not a very intelligent person, as you'll see when I read what she said, but she is a good leftist. And in 2018, she was talking about the value of abortion, and what she said is, whether you kind of fundamentally care about reproductive rights and access, right? Because again, these are not the same thing. If you care about social justice or economic justice, agency, you have to care about this, she said, according to a clip published by the Media Research Center. And I'm going back to her quote. It is not a disconnected fact that American women entering the labor force from 1970 to 2009 added $3.5 trillion to our economy, right? The net new entrance of women, that is not disconnected from the fact that Roe became the law of the land in January of 1973. So I think whatever it is that people say they care about, I think that you can connect to this issue. She was not alone in saying that. I apologize for the next picture on the screen too. This is Janet Yellen in 2022 when, as Treasury Secretary, she opined that it would be a terrible thing if the Supreme Court were to do away with Roe v. Wade. Quote, I believe that eliminating the right of women to make decisions about when and whether to have children would have very damaging effects on the economy and would set women back decades. Roe v. Wade and access to reproductive health care, including abortion, helped lead to increased labor force participation. It enabled many women to finish school. That increased their earning potential. It allowed women to plan and balance their families and careers. End quote. Now, first of all, to conflate abortion with family planning, you can delay childbirth, you can go to school, you can have a career if you don't have sex. Abstinence is an option, as the fundamentalist Christians always said. Also, responsible use of birth control. The sad fact is, for many people, abortion is birth control. And the other thing is that both these women are wrong. For one thing, putting all these women into the workforce devalued everybody's labor. In the 50s, most families could survive on one person working, and it meant that the woman could be home raising the kids, which is, as I have discovered, something of infinite value. It's not very nice, though, to raise kids when you're working full-time and raising kids. Then kids, instead of becoming something of value, become just one more burden in life. So that's not very nice. But the other thing is, as we look at countries that have demographic collapse, Italy, Japan, Germany, rapidly America, all these places without enough children to replace the adults, you can't sustain the economy. Eventually, people get too old to work, to do the heavy labor. They're just too old. They become sick. And you have a few options. You can kill them off, which is what socialized medicine often does. And you can warehouse them. As happened with COVID, you can warehouse them in places where they will die of COVID. That's one method. But eventually, you have an ever smaller cohort of people trying to support a still very large population. It's an upside down pyramid, and it doesn't work. And you've also sold life for money, which is in itself, you've said a baby's life is worth another TV. Kill the baby, get a job, get another TV. And so it is, again, as I said, worse than paganism. This is not about encouraging life. This is not sacrifice to maximize life. It's sacrifice to destroy life. Another thing that we're experiencing today that's similar to and worse than yesterday's paganism is sexual excess and pedophilia. So, gay pride. I came of age in the 70s in San Francisco, and it was a very nice thing when people who had a sexual orientation towards the same sex no longer had to live in fear, no longer had to live in the shadows. But how did we get there from there to here, where there are something like 50% of the days on the calendar have some sort of honoring or awareness of every single kind of LGBTQ whatever? How did we get to orgies in the streets, which is what gay pride parades are? How did we get to gay marriage, which is going to clash inevitably with the First Amendment? How did we get to every classroom being a place for people to indoctrinate children into all things LGBTQ? How did we get from the to the White House having a gay pride parade, gay pride celebration day, where it gave the gay pride flag pride of place over the entry to the White House? And yes, it was an American flag high up on a flagpole where nobody could see it, but clearly the focal point was the gay pride flag. How did we get to the madness of transgenderism, which is both a sign of insanity? It pretends that we're like the gods, where we can have endlessly metamorphizing human bodies. It is also a form of pedophilia, because where they're really directing their energy is to children, to make children's sexuality a matter of adult concern. How did we get to this? This is anti-procreation, which means it's anti-life. It's obsessed with sex as a centrality of society and not for procreative purposes, because no type of LGBTQ plus sex can naturally produce babies. It is the antithesis of everything that is biblical and the embrace of many things that are pagan. And pride, think about that. Pride is the worst of the 7 deadly sins because it's a sin not only against oneself and society, but also against God. So gluttony, it's bad for your body. Sloth, it's bad for you. But pride is a kind of narcissism that places you at the center of the universe. You have disrespect for all of the core biblical laws about the value of life, about those binaries I talked about. Remember, male versus female, procreative versus non-procreative. Since we know there's an increased focus on bestiality of animal versus human, of human dominion over animals, not as sex slaves. It's everything. It's humans saying, I am greater than God. I am filled with pride because I can remake my body, remake my sexuality, ignore the rules. It is not a healthy thing. And as I said, it's very much involved with children. And the Bible, one of the things it does is it has encouraged respect for childhood. This is why we don't have a culture like Islam where you can start marrying girls at the age of 9, or where, as in Afghanistan, boys are just used for sex, because the way they view it is, if it's a boy, you're not a homosexual. If you have sex with a man, you're a homosexual. But in a culture where women are locked away, if you have sex with a boy, you're not homosexual. Again, this is all antithetical to the Judeo-Christian doctrine. And if you're looking at the video, I have a picture that Ollie London put up. And on the right side of the picture is Jeffrey Epstein's famous weird temple with the gold dome and then the blue and white horizontal striped building. And as a reminder, our society, we went after Jeffrey Epstein, we went after Ghislaine Maxwell. We've never, ever touched the people who were on that island doing dirty deeds with teenagers. Because Jeffrey Epstein wasn't so much into children. He just liked them young. So 14, 15, 16. But I am absolutely sure that he had children there for those who liked them young. And this Ollie London picture on the left-hand side is Sam Smith, the male singer who is into Satanism and who claims he's a they-them. So he has overridden God and created his own sex. He is wearing a long-sleeve shirt that has blue and white stripes, just like the temple. And on it is a picture of a blonde boy wearing a blue and white striped t-shirt and eating an apple. And of course, because of the Bible, the biblical story of Adam and Eve, where we assume the fruit she ate was an apple, the apple is associated with sexual knowledge. So if that isn't in-your-face pedophilia at the highest level of Western culture, I don't know what is. So I've talked about similar to and worse is our earth worship, our child sacrifice, our sexual excess, and pedophilia. Now let's get to the drug culture. We have created a total drug culture in America, but it is not a respectful drug culture that's about reaching a higher consciousness, as the pagans did. It is instead a completely decadent drug culture, and we've embraced it with our embrace of pot, which is a terrible drug, no matter what anybody tells you. It can cause brain damage. It destroys ambition. It is the opiate of the masses. I know young people whose lives are spent smoking pot, playing video games. Young men have lost all interest in sex because nothing is as satisfying to them as pot and video games. Another anti-life thing. I have on the screen a picture of people in Philadelphia just grokked out from trank. We also have fentanyl pouring across the border, which the Biden administration encourages through the open border. So our culture is awash in drugs, not for spirituality, which would still be a problem, but simply to enervate people so they become dysfunctional. It is anti-life. This is not closer to God. This is the destruction of the human soul. We're also pagan at a core moral level. So, as I said, pagan was rules-based. It wasn't moral as we understand the Ten Commandments and the Noahide laws. So it was simply about running around trying to keep various gods happy. And a lot of our climate change is like that, but also our wokeism. You know, the woke mob stampedes from one direction to another. It is a religion without the possibility of redemption and forgiveness. If you offend the woke gods, even if you grovel and apologize, you are cast forever into the wilderness. One of the only ways to redeem yourself is to become even more woke than the next person. And that is the point that we've reached. And the way I think about this, if you're looking at the screen, you see a compass versus a map. So there is no overarching moral universe that helps guide us. There is no big system. And think of it, a compass has fixed points. These are the moral points. If I am in San Francisco, again, going back to my roots, a city that's perfectly along a north, south, east, west axis with the bay to the east, the ocean to the west, the Golden Gate Bridge to the north. It's a pretty easy city to navigate if you know your compass points. You never truly get lost. You always know generally where you are. But if I were to be in one of the dense streets of San Francisco and someone said, go 2 blocks and then make a right turn, and then go another block and make a left turn, and then go 3 blocks and make another left turn, and then go 6 blocks and makes a right turn, if I miss one of those turns, if I get it wrong, I am lost. Because all I had were rules, and the rules were minute and focused and dedicated to specific points and situations. And that is where we are when we let go of the Judeo-Christian law and become pagan again, where we're just trying to keep one step ahead of the demands of Gaia and our woke betters. It's a terrible place to be. So I said we're worse then because we are hostile to life. Why are we hostile to life? And this is where I'm getting to the big question. This is my wrap up. This is my grand finale. So I found a Facebook page. I mentioned that I found those posters of women's, the anti-child posters. It is a Facebook page called literally Save the Earth, Reduce Childbirth. So it's not save humankind, reduce childbirth. It's not saying we've reached a Malthusian point where unless we reduce childbirth, we're all going to die in horrible famine. This is save the earth. Think about that. So my next slide shows a lovely glade and said, if a tree falls in a forest, I'm sure you all know that philosophical question. If a tree falls in a forest and there's no one there, does it make a sound? Well, in terms of waves, yeah, it makes a sound. But we humans give meaning to things. Without us, there is no meaning. The earth is beautiful because our eyes see beauty. A baby's laugh is delightful because we love the baby and we hear the bells in its laughter. We give meaning. And yes, mammals love their children. Animals have procreative urges, but they are not existential. They do not see a future. They do not think beyond the moment and the needs of survival. As I always say, I still remember back when the New York Times was sometimes interesting, it had an article about a man who he wrote that he wasn't a vegetarian, but he was an ethical meat eater. Because he said animals are not existential. The pig is not standing there thinking, yeah, sure, I can roll in the mud today, but tomorrow I'm going to be slaughtered. And the chicken doesn't think, scratch, 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 I'm going to die. The movie Babe was a total fake. Animals live in the moment, and he said we humans have an obligation to make their moments nice, that they shouldn't be tortured, that they shouldn't have cruel deaths, that chickens shouldn't be penned in cages where they can't move and that kind of thing. But existential awareness, value, is something humans add. Modern paganism isn't just anti-human, it's nihilistic. It's postmodernism that says human life has no meaning whatsoever. An earth return to a pre-human phase, which would truly be one in the eye for the biblical world, because the whole point of the Bible is that God created humans. So what we're saying is that humans can uncreate what God created, that we can reduce the earth to a pre-God status of no humans. that is what that is what the left wants to do. Everything they do is directed at reducing the earth or returning the earth to a pre-human time. But what meaning does it have then? Humans are killing humans for the benefit of a non-sentient rock. And that's why we're worse than the pagans. Whether viewed through the pagan lens or through the Judeo-Christian lens, it's always been about human life. And leftists are abandoning Judeo-Christian morals, the ones that underpin America, that are enshrined in our First Amendment. They are undermining those morals for a rock. Even the pagans didn't do that. And on that note, I'd like to thank you for having the patience to listen to me. Have a great week, or a great until whenever I talk to you next.
So that gives us a much broader idea of the anti-human views of the left, and many Jews in the establishment culture, Jewish culture, go along with this nonsense. I follow social media, and there is a conservative named Stu Peters. I don't know if any of you ever follow him, but he doesn't miss an opportunity to point out the hypocrisy of Jews. And he had a quote there on Yom Kippur on his Getter feed that had a Jew saying how anti-Semites hate Jews because we gave a moral code to the world. And Stu Peters rightly said, yeah, really? And he goes down the laundry list of Jewish community views on, you gave us abortion, transgenderism, all these crazy things that Jews are into, and he called us hypocrites. So I can't fault him for that. Whenever I read one of his posts, I want to say, yes, but we're not all like that. We're not all like that. But instead of doing that in my quiet way, I just continue with our work. And with that, I would like to open the discussion up. Anybody want to start? Okay, Rob, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. So great to see you. Well, I disagreed with her about fossil fuels, but I basically agreed with just about everything else she said. I'm not into nuclear. Believe me, it's not a renewable source. Don't get me started on that. It's dangerous. But, everything else she said was pretty right on, I thought.
Thank you, Rob. Thanks for being here. Moshi.
I think that, on the Stu Peters issue, somebody, not just him, but somebody like us needs to take the opportunity when confronted with these allegations to show them to make the difference between non-observant Jews and observant Jews. And there's a big difference, and they've grayed the lines, but we need to show them the difference between observant Jews and non-observant Jews. And also the fossil fuels, they're not really made out of fossils, and God appeared in fire and is formless. So, yeah, but other than that, she had a lot of good points.
Okay, thank you, Moshi.
Okay, I happen to think that the problem is mainstream Judaism. They don't say observant, and they belong to the Reform and a lot of the conservative. I do think that there's conservative that are on the fence. I know here in the Pacific Northwest, where I am presently right now, you can go into any Reform synagogue or conservative synagogue, and they are so left-wing and so into pride. They all go to pride parades as a group. They're so into the climate, and climate is their religion more than anything else. So I think that we have to separate ourselves and start almost doing anything else. I can't even go into a Reform synagogue, and I taught there for years, and I came to the conclusion that it was child abuse, plain and simple. I think all this pride nonsense is child abuse. I thought so from the beginning. I'm really against hurting anybody for whoever they're attracted to. or making a fools of them or being mean to them, but encouraging it and discussing it and planting seeds is, I think, is really mean to children. And we saw all from the beginning, you can separate being gay or homosexual from LGBT. And the reason is LGBT is a political movement and has morphed into a religion. It is not the same. It's from the beginning, its signs were a unicorn, rainbows, all the things that are attractive to children. I have granddaughters and they both love unicorns. One especially has nothing to do with that. So they took symbols from the beginning and everybody ignored it. But those are entrenched within the Reformed synagogues now. I can't even say how much. And if you compare, like if right now I'm with Chabad and a woman is very much secluded from a lot of things, but there is no hostility towards women, the opposite. And if I'm in the Reform movement, they're just openly hostile to men. It's even funny when people are hostile to men, unless, of course, you're a man wanting to be a woman, thinking that you're a woman or you're homosexual, but a regular straight man, they're hostile to. And when a man is good at something like reading the Torah or something like that, they're even more hostile. But if you're a man wearing a dress and you're good at, bal kriya, bal koreh, then you are exalted as something special. So it is a problem, and it's impossible to fight them also, because like if we say, oh, we don't belong with them, we're the bad people. We're not being nice. We're not being inclusive. I hear now the words inclusive, and I know that there really is an evil thing. They're not being inclusive. They're exclusive of anything good. If they include only bad things, you're for discrimination based on race. You're for including people, men in women's spaces, all of that. And the Reform has it. They have it. And that's what he's saying. 2 Peters. Yes. And so it's really hard. But I do think that we have to get a voice and say a lot of Jews are not part of that. And those are Jews by DNA, if at all. And it's not Judaism. It's not Judaism. That's not us. And we have to stick up for ourselves. I know it's hard. I've been called names and I'm mean and I'm terrible in the Reform movement around here. I can't walk in there. I'm a terrible person.
I'm sorry, because you're such a lovely woman. They don't know what they're missing, but we get your company.
Well, no,
anyway.
they don't. They know what they're missing. They don't want that. They don't want somebody saying, no, it's okay to be a guy. We don't hate men here.
Dawn?
The energy thing, I think, really is another. She didn't really address it this way, but there's the pagan myth about what was his name, Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods and then gave it to humanity, and now is being punished forever by having his liver eaten or so. I forget what it is, but anyway, he's being eternally punished for having given fire to humanity. But then there's a midrash, and I don't remember, I've got it somewhere on the hard drive, where God comes to Adam and basically says, here, I got something that's really going to be helpful to you, and shows him how to make fire. And of course, with fire, we can cook our food, whether it's on my gas, don't take it away, gas stove, or it's remotely in a power generating station, and it's brought here by electrical wires for my microwave. Or it's you don't make steel without fire. You don't make a whole lot of stuff without fire. Many products, and charcoal for your barbecue of a Sunday afternoon. It's a gift. It's a real gift. And then, from what I understand, the Russians, they keep finding a lot of oil. They are exploring, from what I've read, on the basis of what do they call something? It's a natural process that's ongoing currently to produce petroleum down under the ground. And they seem to be pretty successful at that kind of production. So I personally, I mean, with all due respect to people who want to get rid of petroleum, it's a gift from the Almighty, because it built Western civilization. No flame, no Western civilization. And I hope that Biden, whatever you want to call him, the resident, the pretender, is bringing all this oil from Iran and Venezuela in sailing ships that have no carbon footprint. But I don't think so. So much for they don't believe it. They don't believe it, running around in their private jets and all that stuff. And get a heavy transport, like a 747, an Airbus or whatever, from LA to New York on electric batteries. Fat chance of that. Anyway, I could continue a long time. I have an essay written. I don't know if I ever sent it to you, Cecily, about the transition from sail to steam navigation. Did I send that?
No, I don't think so.
I'll send it. Because we didn't go out and, the Savannah made it, first steamship made it across the Atlantic Ocean. Well, the engines weren't running all the time. It was only when there was a calm and there was no wind. The sails pulled it most of the way. Anyway, we got steamships now that will cross an ocean. Let's just sink all the sailing ships and only have steamships. Well, we don't have very many of them built yet. Well, we'll get them built. Don't worry about it. So people starve for not getting food from the breadbasket of the Midwest over to Europe. We'll get it done. Anyway, I could go on and on. Anyway.
Thank you, Don. Thanks for being here. Appreciate your comments always. Okay, Moshe.
Let me go after Yosef.
Okay.
Oh, so thank you for having me, everybody. My name's Rabbi Yosef Hayim. It's the first time here, so maybe what I wanted to bring up, you guys have already heard. But there was one point in the presentation, which I enjoyed, by the way, where they said that we don't know when the babies feel pain. So what I find is a compelling argument is there's a debate on YouTube. I don't know who Mike Adams is, but if you type in Mike Adams abortion debate, he debates an abortion doctor who's a horrible person named Willie Parker, but he gives his position on abortion, and he admits that these are children. He makes the joke several times that women don't give birth to puppies, so he thinks this is somehow funny enough to take the edge off of what he describes doing to them. And he admits to dismembering these children, arm and a leg at a time, and then assembling them together to make sure that he's gotten all the body parts out. So they ask him in this debate, at what point does the child feel pain? And I don't remember the number of weeks, so I don't want to come up with an incorrect number, but he says they feel the same thing that you and I as adults would feel at X number of weeks, X being the number that he gives. And then they ask him, after he's described dismembering what he refers to as children, would you perform one of these abortions after X number of weeks if a woman came to you and says that there is no medical emergency for her or the child? So basically, if the mother wants the child aborted for no reason other than inconvenience. And he says yes, that he would. So he admits to dismembering children, arm and leg at a time, that would feel pain the same as you and I would, for no reason other than he's getting paid to do so. So I find this to be a compelling argument, because when you're debating people, you know, they always want to say that, well, you're not an expert, you don't do this for a living. So who better to quote than people who are actually performing these procedures for a living? And another compelling thing that I found in that debate was that Mike Adams brought up the fact that what they teach in medical school, the embryology textbooks, says that life begins when sperm comes into contact with the egg. So if they don't like this definition, this is what all doctors are being taught. So the purpose of the debate is for the audience. You're never going to convince Willie Parker that what he's doing is wrong, but there's fence sitters in the audience that need to hear both sides. There's anti-Semites out there that you're not going to change their mind no matter what they say. If it rains today, they're going to blame Jews for it. But again, I think it comes back to the audience. Sometimes it's worth engaging. I know Stu Peters has an associate that made a post on social media that says George Floyd was not killed by the knee on the neck. He was killed by a drug overdose, which I don't disagree with that assessment. But then that same person later makes a post saying that the law enforcement in that part of the country was trained by the Israeli Defense Forces, and that's a technique that they use. So now all of a sudden, what's not the cause of death is being blamed because it could have been taught by Israel. And for those who don't know, law enforcement all over the country travel to Israel to learn a lot of these defense techniques. So when they're making these double standard accusations, I think pointing things like this out can convince the audience that the problem is kind of with the person making the accusations. For example, you know, sometimes they'll take things out of the Talmud out of context, and which sounds bad. And they did that once, and you know, where they quoted it from was Avodah Zarah, which is foreign service, clearly prohibited. And so when I asked them to translate what Avodah Zarah means for context, it really shined a light on everything, that what they are quoting is something that's prohibited, not something that we condone. So it would be like taking one sentence out of an American law statute that says rape and molestation is defined as, and then saying that we condone this, but the statute is under felonies, something that's clearly prohibited. So I agree with this point that there are some anti-Semites that you're not going to convince them, and if you're not educated in some of these topics, maybe it's not your place to engage in the debate. But again, I think sometimes it's worth having the debate for the audience to see that the people making the accusations are not presenting a clear picture. So that's just my opinion. That's what I wanted to do. So thank you for having me. I enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you for being here, Yosef, and thank you, Moshe, for inviting the rabbi.
Pleasure.
Okay, would
Yeah,
you like to share now?
Yeah, I would. As far as the Stu Peters thing, they have a saying that even a broken clock is right twice a day. Stu Peters does make a lot of good points. He's not wrong about everything. And the fact that he's even in this war against the anti-humanists, maybe he's confused. I would like, as an, just as an optimist, to hold out hope. We have friends, we have mutual friends with Stu Peters. We're not friends with Stu Peters, but we do have mutual friends like Thomas Renz, who had advised a rabbinical council to tell the pregnant Jewish women not to take the shots. We also have General Michael Flynn, who is very warm to us. And those friends could, if we are the unicorns, the mystical creatures, we're the dragon slayers that aren't afraid to speak truth to power and take down the establishment. So if I think that if we continue to lead by example as Jews what Judaism should look like, and to expose what the secular Jews or non-observant Jews are doing, and that there's actually a different from us. There was a rule. It's an unwritten rule that after somebody gets to a certain age, you never free a mind after a certain age. But I think it's possible if somebody was to be intellectually honest. So at this point, there's a crossroads. You take the blue pill. You wake up tomorrow and everything's the same. Or you take the red pill. You see how far this rabbit hole goes. I think we can red pill him. The fact that he's on our side on a lot of other issues, maybe he is willing to be intellectually honest, and he's just been confused from the propaganda that a lot of people have put out about Judaism or Jews in general, and that we really do exist. I do take this as a personal challenge, and I think that maybe over weeks, months, or years that we could convince possibly, and I don't think that it's. I don't think I'm wasting my time. And even if I don't convince him, if we're willing to have this argument in public, like the other people could see, even if we don't convince him, maybe we can convince the fence setters. I think we can convince him, though.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Moshe. Now, our friend Thomas wants to weigh in. So glad to see you, sir.
Well, I don't know exactly what I'm going to say. My wife would laugh at that. As a Catholic who was born with Jewish grandparents who survived the war in Berlin, and who was a Catholic priest, you could imagine the interpsychic struggle that I have come through to be where I am at the place today. Christianity in terms of the synodeicide and the blood libel. The blood libel was pretty well in 1759 renounced, but they couldn't renounce all of the blood libels for the simple fact, and don't shoot the messenger here, for the simple fact that some of those blood libels were instituted by popes. The same with the sin of deicide, about killing the Savior. And I think, well, I know what differentiates Catholics from non-Catholics, most of them. I mean, a lot of them, non-Catholics, are very, very good people, but they just don't think about these types of things. But along doctrinal or dogmatic lines, that has been renounced since Vatican II. And the very important thing here is that the Jewish people are very much into the whole idea of repentance. So it's very important not to throw out the baby with the bathwater, and I say that pun intentionally here, at this time, and color all people and say it's finished, it's over, blah, 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 blah. Because the philosophy and the theology of the Catholic Church in particular is that of resurrection. So if there is total bleakness, total death, it's the Jewish proverb, I'd rather light a candle than curse the darkness. They lit a candle, and that was Vatican II. And Vatican II not only is very much in solidarity with the whole idea of pro-life, anti-abortion, but it has also gone a long way in recognizing that Catholics can't fight that alone, and neither can this little group fight it alone. Paganism is too pervasive. What we have to do is somehow think through a philosophy, a theology, and I believe it's in the Hebrew scriptures as well. It's just probably not highlighted in the way that they'll be highlighting it in 50 or 100 years, is that we have to stand against this culture of death. And the culture of death isn't just with abortion. And I love the way whoever it was, I might have even been you, Lowell, who mentioned about the Holocaust, and then paralleled it to abortion. Yes, and there's also all this drug wars and arms race and nuclear race. That's all the culture of death. And I think that, and I'll probably leave it here, where it has to lead in the future is that there has to be a collective unity within Christianity, Judaism, but from anywhere where which it comes. It could be some people who, like the gentleman you're just mentioning, who is going to try to bring along the other gentleman, they might not be formed in their way of thinking in the world. So they're very pro-life and this, but on another level, if you look at them in another way, you can see that unconsciously they hate the Jewish people or they hate Israel, and they're just masking all that, eh? And that's very important to realize. And so, as a Catholic, leaving off here, it's very important to realize that a lot of Christians, unconsciously, even probably a little within myself, have unowned shadow as it has been projected over the centuries towards the Jewish people. So that's the project of the future, along with the pro-life cause. Amen.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate your weighing in. I believe that a true test of a person's relationship with God or allegiance to God is a humility that does not include this rage, because an angry person is angry because the world and God aren't doing what he wants them to do, right? So we get angry at people and God because life isn't going the way we want it to. And I think when there's a humility, that's an ingredient to that essential, effective relationship with the Creator, then that rage goes away and you don't have to hate anybody. You don't have to be self-recriminating either. But if a person is angry and pugilistic and aggressive, then they're still playing God somewhere in their own ego-centered mind. Being involved in the pro-life movement has taught me to be active and engaged, but with a peaceful soul. Somebody mentioned, oh yes, I know, it was in one of Lowell's recent shows, somebody brought up the Christian idea of turning the other cheek and how that's not a Jewish idea, that's a Christian idea. And the way that was explained to me was that if a person in those times slapped somebody and then you turn the other cheek, it forced them to slap them with the outside of the hand, which was actually a social stigma against the slapper. Jesus was saying something about how you can still make a point as you're being slapped, which I think is interesting. The other thing that means to me is that I can have a very calm mind and a loving heart and still defend innocent life, whether it's mine or somebody else's. I do not have to go into a situation where my mind is distorted and warped by an ego-driven rage, which makes me less effective. The point is to be conscious of God in all my activities and thoughts. Then I need to bring that into that place too, where I'm defending life, whether it's with my words or my deeds. So yeah, I really appreciate that. And I have some very good Catholic friends and I'm very grateful for them. We're on good terms, but there is always that underlying consciousness that there's something that's not quite in alignment. And I try to make light of it by saying, we're all looking for that golden age where the Messiah comes, whether he's coming for the first or second time. And that usually relaxes the mood a little bit. So I think a lot of this difference in religion is semantics. And as you said, it's over generations that we've been taught to hate each other. And I'm just so grateful that today I can say I don't have any hate in my heart for anybody. And so I'm hoping that my message can be more effective. And the last thing I'll say is this whole idea of building bridges is so important, whether it's replying to Stu Peters' posts or like Moshe and I are going to these majority evangelical events and spreading the word of pro-life Judaism and Torah-based Judaism with people, with a lot of people who only know the other way. They only think that Jews are what the media portrays them and the Jewish establishment insists on showing us to be, which is not what we are at all. One of the things the Jewish Pro-Life Foundation is doing is trying to remediate some of that damage and the hostility and Jew hatred that they're causing because the pot is already stirred and they're just turning up the heat, right? And even good-natured people get caught in it and they don't want to be there. So they meet us and they don't have to deal with that so much. So I think that's a good added value to the work that we're doing.
I would like to add that I can't tell you how many times that me and Cecily have been out at these events and walking up to individuals and having a discussion with them, and they would just be totally relieved to find out that we exist, and neutralizing the hatred and winning them over, showing them an example of, you know, like the way we observe Judaism is a breath of fresh air to these people. They love it.
I just want to say that all this is really important, but we can't push aside the important work that is getting through to Reform and conservative Jews who are pro-death and not only pro-abortion, just anti-life. I don't know how else to describe it. A lot of the big organizations, like the organization, I think the Jewish Agency in Tacoma, I don't know about Seattle, I'm kind of in between those two places, but they give, if you go on their website, they give money to Keshet, which means rainbow, and it's a very pro LGBTQ organization that works within the Reform movement and lobbies for this stuff. And they also give to, this is the worst of all, is LGBTQ youth, Jewish youth. And they're active within the Reform movement. So we want to get through to, we don't have anybody in the Reform movement being pro-natal, pro-life. We don't have anything set up for them. So I don't want to stop or undermine what we're doing with all these other organizations and sticking up for ourselves, but we're not doing anything to help those guys, because I think that their lives are being damaged, and they're also very much against family. I mean, they're a lot of them are the last generation of their family on the earth, because they don't want to have kids. It's not that they don't have kids because they didn't try, and they tried. They're not having children because they think it's more moral because of the earth. And they're teaching children that. Imagine being taught as a child that you're a scorn on the earth. So we want to get through with them. And I really like what you said, Celia, that is, we have to go at it without being angry. So I have a problem with that, because it pushes my buttons. You seem to be a lot better at it, but we want to get through to them also, because this is bad for them, and it's bad for all of us. They've been infected with this paganism. I liked what you said. And we can't just leave them behind, or we just have to do something. And maybe it means lobbying for groups within that also have our message, like Keshet, which we all know what Keshet means. It means rainbow, but just go down that line of thought in addition.
Yes, Ruth, thank you. It's so difficult, because even if we had the money, I can't buy any kind of advertising space in any media that they have a hold of. So that's one problem. We started this billboard campaign, and I'd love to put a big Jewish Pro-Life Foundation billboard near every Reform synagogue in America. That would be fun. It would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And they're the ones that are giving all their money to Planned Parenthood and all these crazy left-wing funds. They're just a material governor on what we can do.
It's true, but I come from a Reform tradition, and somebody's got to me. So this can happen. I know that the ways that we're talking about, but I think that first off, we have to recognize that there is an issue. It's not only that Reform Judaism has gone that way. They've gone that way because these organizations have done such a good job of lobbying them and convincing them, and not allowing anybody else to speak. Because if anybody else speaks, they're the ones who are angry. They're the ones, and maybe exposing, because that's what always got me. People were just so angry. It's like in Israel, people were so angry against people in the West Bank, what they call the West Bank, which really isn't the West Bank, but Judea and Samaria, let's say. But people were so angry at them. And maybe sometimes, I know it's really hard to do, but just to expose their anger is what does it. Because it's not that, if they're really religious and really believe in God, they shouldn't, and they wouldn't be so frightened of a different opinion. But we've also haven't tried hard enough.
I agree with that too, in that Judaism has become devoid of spiritual nourishment, right? It's all about the law and these rules, and it's very intellectual, and people's souls and spirits are not being fed in regular Jewish worship or community. And so Reform culture has given Jews a pagan religion, right, that they can feel virtuous and good about. That's one thing. That's that whole replacement spirituality problem. And in that way, we have failed. There's this group called the Jewish Leadership Project that says that establishment Jewish leaders should repent on Yom Kippur because they failed their flocks. Well, they don't feel like they've failed. They've given them something that they get well paid for, and makes and lets people feel good about themselves. Whereas a lot of Jewish, well, maybe the rabbi can speak to this if he's still here, but just Reform and conservative religious worship doesn't really feed a person's soul. I almost left Judaism 3 times. Well, I did. I left twice and came back because I have this attraction for it, right? And then the third time I said, if I'm going to say, I have to start the Jewish Pro-Life Foundation because I have to surround myself with Jews that have a respect for life. Because when I was sitting in a synagogue, I would feel nervous because I knew if I was a baby in the womb, I wouldn't have a chance because of the people sitting in the pews around me. And it's how could I actually engage in that kind of culture? So yes, we've been let down spiritually, and we've been let down culturally. And then on the other hand, this whole idea of somebody needs to say something. I'm very forgiving, and I don't judge our more frum and observant community leaders, but they don't say enough.
No, I do think that they're trying. But what's happened is that anybody who is within the Reform movement or is teaching there, like I did, way after I didn't agree with anything they said, just taught because I just have a bit of knowledge, more than they do, let's say, ends up leaving because the vitriol is impossible. Yeah, if I was asked to talk about the 10 Commandments once, and I brought up Dennis Prager because he wrote a magnificent book about the 10 Commandments, bringing up Dennis Prager caused so much anger. I mean, just so much anger. You wouldn't believe what they went through. And I brought up other rabbis that didn't agree with them. I didn't think, on the political spectrum, but Dennis Prager's book on the 10 Commandments is really a great book. I can't recommend it enough. And, it's just who did I bring up? Okay. So I know that it's really hard, and I don't blame the Orthodox. Actually, I'm very understanding with their attitude because they just get shouted down and called names and things like that. So I don't blame them, but I do think that in spite of all that, when they do expose the anger, I think it does bring people around. Also, at that same time when I gave a talk about the 10 Commandments and why they were so important, I had other people afterwards come over and thank me. So they came out of the woodworks, and they were and other people were looking on at the Kiddush and this wasn't even a Reform community, it was a modern Orthodox community that were looking on and kind of like, oh, they're talking to her now. And a few people came over and yelled at both of us, and then their third person who joined us. But it's not, in other words, I don't blame the Orthodox, but I do think that we have to be, all of us, be ready to take the vitriol. Yeah, that's what I think.
Thank you. And we don't need to be fear-based people. We can just speak. the truth. It's very
Mhm.
important. I agree with you. Ken, would you like to unmute because you've had such great comments in the chat? Would you like to share?
Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone had an easy, meaningful, inspiring fast. Not sure what else to add. I really enjoyed the video. Apparently some of you had seen it before. That's a very wise, sharp woman. And she really showed how I feel like we're losing. I mean, the Dobbs decision was fantastic on abortion. I actually think we do have a lot of momentum. There is some pushback on this trans revolution. I read that for the first time in at least a decade, support for gay marriage is dropping. And the reason for that is, and you may have your own opinion about that. I mean, my whole family is pro-gay marriage, pro-abortion.
Okay,
But the point is, the reason there's pushback on gay marriage is because the trans movement is scaring people, because people for the first time, they're realizing that these ghouls, and I'm not talking about gay people who just want to live their own lives like everybody and want their privacy like everybody else, but these trans ghouls and these gay ghouls are reaching out to children. And that's the reason that 40% of high school students now are claiming to be LGBTQ. Well, no, they aren't. No, they're not. That is brainwashing. That is social contagion. And I think it does go against God. And what the woman in the video, and I'm sorry I don't remember her name, but she raised a lot of good points about just in terms of how it goes against God. It is that this sexual activity in broad daylight is very, very pagan and disgusting and vulgar. And I saw someone make the point, I think it was actually a gay conservative, I think it might have been Clark Lawson. It was fun at first to have gay pride parades where they were really marching for gay rights and for gay marriage, which I don't agree with, but that's what they wanted. Now it's people having sex in public. It's people having sex on the streets, and straight married couples are bringing their children to this. And it's abominable and it's disgusting. I've never been to a pride parade. I've only seen them on TV, but this is what's happening. It's like the Carnival Bacchanal in New Orleans, where people are just openly doing whatever they want because they're drunk and having fun, and no one's going to stop them. And that's what happens when we don't have, as Prager and Rabbi Telushkin would say, ethical monotheism. When we don't have Hashem telling us how to act and how to behave and what to do, anything goes. One of Dennis's favorite examples, I know it's one of his favorites because I've heard it more than once. What was the situation in ancient Rome? In ancient Rome, people were married, but every wealthy man, every man who had stature, every property owning male had a boyfriend on the side. That was for fun, often considerably younger. And that was just accepted in that culture because no one told them, they didn't have the Noahide laws. No one told them that's wrong. And my understanding is the situation exists in Brazil today. Look at the Greek educational system for boys. Every relationship, every teacher-student relationship, every relationship was pedophilia. Every relationship was sexual. They didn't have the concept of children and adults, and you don't rape children. We have that concept. And I think, as I read this too, the next step for the trans ghouls, the next step for these monsters, these revolution, what they're putting in schools, books like most obviously Genderqueer, that's the most famous. I can't think of the names of the other. Oh, the one book is called This Book is Gay. It's actual, I mean, Facebook wouldn't even let me post this. It's actual pornography. A man, like in textbooks for 10-year-old kids, showing a man giving another man oral. That's beyond disgusting. And what they're going to come up with next is they're going to say it's okay to have sex with kids. That's what's next. And we have to stop them now. Thank you, Cecily. Thank you, because I did have a few more comments.
Thank you so much. So I was thinking about this whole idea of conservatism detached from biblical principles. So you have people who've left the left, but they're still not Bible-based. So they still wiggle around for their own personal choices, and they somehow justify or rationalize that it's okay for them. And I just think they're not quite as reliable or trustworthy as people who find their conservative values through the Bible. There's a whole spectrum of people. Everybody's on their personal journey, as I say. And God willing, those people, Ruth, that you're talking about, and Ken, the people that you're talking about, will somehow or another on their journey find their way over here. Thank you, everybody, so very much for everything. You can find us at jewishprolifefoundation.org. We have a healing program called Tikvat Rachel for Jewish women and men who suffer after abortion. We have some nice Jewish-friendly pregnancy care and adoption referrals. We're making progress on our Israel Pro-Life Education Project. This week, I am signing a contract and sending our initial payment to our digital marketer for creation of our Hebrew website in Israel. I am praising Hashem for getting us this far and believing in my heart that we will have the money to pay this man to do his wonderful work. Okay, Lowell, I'm done. Thank you so very much.
We want to thank Cecily for another illuminating presentation, also the wonderful video she showed, and for the conversation between friends here. I put some notes in chat. I don't know if anyone saw them, so I'll just say very briefly, if that's possible for me. When I established the Root and Branch Association, it wasn't an association, my father's idea. It was supposed to be Root and Branch, with the words root and branch from Romans 11, the root is holy and the branch is holy, a guide to Christian individuals and organizations active in support of Israel. I couldn't publish the guide because the more research I did, I found that the Interfaith Dialogue Cloud wasn't supporting Israel, and the Christian Zionists were all engaged in missionary activities. When I start my monthly Christian Israel Fellowship seminars, the first one will be about Bernard of Clairvaux. Bernard of Clairvaux, the founder of which order? The Benedictines. Anyway, as one of the rabbis of the time said, it was the time of the Crusades. If it wasn't for that righteous man, we'd all be dead. This was, like Master Yoda. He would come out into the fields against these hordes of the Crusaders and the children. These basically, they were sent off to the Crusades to end up being killed and not come back, especially when aristocrats had too many sons. He would stand in the fields and say, "Leave these Jews alone." He wrote letters about it to to the churches in Germany and France and England. We still have them. And he expresses his theology that it's a mystery why the Jews are still here, and will all be resolved in the end of days when they'll all convert to Christianity or something like that. So he saved them from totally being destroyed. Upon his moral authority, you have these big, big crusader warrior types. This little priest, Bernard de Clairvaux, old man, goes right out in front and said, "You can't do this." And his moral authority was so great that they didn't. There are issues which transcend theological and philosophical. You have to save the children. Everyone should work together. That's why I wrote that two of my favorite rabbis are Frank Pavone and Archbishop Vigano. And probably if they're from southern Italy, the farther south you go from Rome, there's more Jewish DNA. There's, by the time you get to Sicily and Sardinia, the whole place is yeshiva. Because the Jews settled there so long ago, a lot of them went underground and became Catholics. I have no concept of denominational Judaism. You're born of a Jewish mother, you're a Jew. I went to Reform Synagogue. You can call yourself whatever you want. There's Torah, true, authentic Israelite faith. And if you're born of a Jewish mother, you're a Jew. Who came up with the term for Orthodox? It was a term of derision at the beginning of the 19th century to refer to Torah true Jews when the Enlightenment was starting. Cecily and the rabbis she works with are all flying the flag, and that's all they can do. You can't change the fact that all sorts of people from all sorts of denominations and all sorts of organizations, you got these people shooting off their big mouths. To be fair to Stu Peters, what is poor Schnook Goyim supposed to know? They don't know. How can they distinguish? You got these, we would call them Erev Rav. They may be born halachically Jewish. God knows who and what. Are they really from the Erev Rav Moses brought out of Egypt? Are Idumeans, Esav, Khazars, reptilian? I don't know what they are. These people are enemies of the Godland, Torah, and people of Israel. And the first defense they have is, that's anti-Semitism. No, George Soros, his real name is Georgie Schwartz. You can't pull that with me. And they know they can't. What do you say? I'm following Rabbi Meir Kahane, like my father. So they have a problem. And I'm not saying you shouldn't. If you want to go talk to Stuart Peters, go ahead. I wouldn't. And is it possible for people to repent, present company included? Of course it is.
The only way we're going to gain ground is to continue. This is just my personal thoughts, is we have to continue extending the olive branch so that they can know that we exist. I will continue extending the olive branch until it becomes dangerous for me to do so.
The best olive branch is just to tell the truth, like Cecily, and you are
That's
doing.
what we're doing.
Rav Kook said, the first chief rabbi of the so-called state of Israel, he said, in order for the world of truth to appear, the world of lies has to be destroyed. In order for the world of lies to be destroyed, you have to get the U-boats to surface and blow them out of the water. So the best way is just tell the truth. Cecily and her rabbis and you are doing that. Just tell what are authentic Israelite teachings or whatever the issue is. Just tell the truth.
When they're intellectually honest to realize that we set the standard, then there will be a lot more of us. That's why we're going to continue to keep going out there, and we're going to continue to keep giving them a good impression of us.
Well, you are doing that, and that's why we have, for my part, these seminars from Jerusalem. That's my kind, to build up the broadcasting network from all the forces, like, as if any of you are fans of the Lord of Rings, Elrond tells Gandalf, Sauron's eye is fixed on Rivendell, and Satan's eye is fixed on Jerusalem. Right over there, I look down on it from my rooftop, is the Temple Mount. All the evil forces are concentrated there. They all want it. On the other hill is the Masonic Temple, which masquerades as the Supreme Court of the State of Israel. Go look it up. With a pyramid on top. Everything's fake. It's all fake. It's all the illusions. The best way is just all tell the truth. So I don't like your truth, but at least they should know what it is.
A coward dies 1,000 times, and if we ever stop leading by example, that's when we'll start dying. We must hold the line.
One other point, and I got 2 minutes. There was the Vatican recently honored a family of 7 Poles murdered by the Nazis. They so-called simple people, I have a problem with that. They're not titles and degrees, all the Jewish gods from the world I come from, status, titles, and degrees, more important than money. It's the status and the titles of degrees. It's a false god. They hid Jews, a farmer and his wife, and someone in the village didn't like him and informed the Nazis. So what did they do? They killed him, his wife, and his kids, including the 1-year-old. It's one thing to say, I'm ready to be a martyr for God, like what the priest who gave his life for the other people in Auschwitz. You have no dependence. And say, oh, do you love your kids and your grandkids? This is the highest level of martyrdom, which is, I'm willing to, no matter what, I'm not going to, as, what is his name? Johnny Cash. I'll stand on, don't back down, at the gates of hell, I won't back down. They didn't. And
Tom Petty.
That was his song? I didn't know that.
That was Tom Petty.
Oh, anyway, Johnny Cash sings it terrific. So that's all we can do. There, you can, to be willing to face death and martyrdom and say Shema every hour on the hour. If that's what happens, you can't lie down at the side. There's no more lie down at the side of the road and say, I don't want to deal with this. You'll just be killed anyway. It is the final battle between good and evil. See Ezekiel 38 and 39. It's all happening now. We'll continue in a month. Meanwhile, Cecily and Moshe, you'll continue doing what you're doing all the time. And, give them hell, Harry. And no, even when it gets dangerous, no, you don't stop. You have to be willing to face death and martyrdom, because whether we're willing to face it or not, they're coming. These people are demonically possessed. I don't care what their ethnic and religious background. When you forsake the God of Israel and his eternal moral law, you're not an animal. I don't insult the animal. You're a creature. These people are creatures. They're zombie apocalypse monsters. And they won't stop. If they're psychopaths for Satan, yes, whether he's a fallen angel or he's God's prophet, it doesn't matter. The result, you have to be a psychopath for God. These people mean business. They will kill you. They will kill all of us. They will process our bodies like in the state of Washington for composting. There is no, I don't want to deal with this. Everyone is now partisan. We're all frontline soldiers for the God-land torn people of Israel, whatever religion, ethnic group.
Amen.
It's hard for a normal person to understand that depth of evil. I'm repeating again, having had family members in the Nazi German Wehrmacht, that in itself is not a crime. Not everybody did something, but some of them did do something. They're coming. One other point. And you like the Lord of the Rings. Frodo meets Aragorn in the Inn of the Prancing Pony, and Aragorn said, "Are you frightened?" And Frodo said, "Yes." And Aragorn said, "Not nearly enough. I know what hunts you. Go pray and keep your powder dry and fight." Okay, I'll see everybody in a few weeks. So long.